Sorry about the few technical issues we had this morning. Welcome to everyone to the seventh of NAHT's online CPD sessions, and it's the last one this term. And I hope we've got everything up and running, so we should be great to go for now. Thank you to so many of you for joining us. I'll make a start. I'm Andy Walls, and I work for the NAHT, and I'm delighted to welcome back today Professor Barry Carpenter, CBE, OBE, PhD. Presenting his work, updating on his work on a recovery curriculum, loss and life for our children and schools post-pandemic. We had Barry on before on the 9th of June, and that went down really well, and people were clamouring for more. So this is backed by popular demand, and I'm also particularly grateful to Barry for coming with us today and putting his retirement on hold a bit to do so. So I'm really pleased to have him today. Many of you will have heard Barry speak on this subject before. He's got a really entertaining blog at barrycarpentereducation.com, which I'm sure you'll have had a look at, and if not, feel free to have a look at later today. Barry is the UK's first professor of mental health in education, based at Oxford Brookes. He's an honorary professor at universities in the UK, Ireland, Germany and Australia, and in a career that spanned over 40 years, he's been a head teacher, a principal, an academic director, chief executive, and director of the Centre of Special Education at Westminster College in Oxford. Quick word about today's training. Obviously, we're at the end of what's been an extraordinary, unprecedented year in school life. I can't think of anything like it in peacetime. And we're now about to recover, regroup, I hope, for 6 weeks, 6.5 weeks, with the view that schools will reopen in full from September. That's the view at the moment. Let's see where we get to between now and then. What we need to do, what you need to do, obviously, is consider how the reopening of your school is going to take place, what the emotional impact of events has been on children as you welcome them back through your doors. Pupils will need to be re-engaged and guided into the new normality, whatever that turns out to look like. And what we hope this course today will help you do is look at the emotional impact of the pandemic on children, the loss they've experienced and how they might rebuild their emotional intelligence, the aims and purposes of a recovery curriculum, how to re-engage the disengaged, what special extra considerations you may need for children with special education needs, and Barry particularly, I know, will focus on autism within that, and what resources we'll all need. Resources and money, obviously a huge issue at the moment. Just a couple of housekeeping questions from me, housekeeping points from me. Firstly, we've got 307, according to the like on the bottom, participants on the call. So your names can be seen by other people, so you can sort of work out who's on the call. If you move your cursor around on the bottom, you can see a participant's icon. Next to that's a Q&A icon, so if you have questions as Barry's presenting, tap them in there. Some people have still got no sound. I hope you can hear me. If you have questions as we go along, tap them in there, and if they're straightforward ones, I'll respond to them as we go along. If not, we'll save them up till we get to the end with Barry. There's a chat function there as well for you to comment and talk amongst yourselves if you want to. Obviously, we'll record the presentation, send that around to you, and we'll send the slides around to you so you get all that. If you have any questions, you can raise a virtual hand. I can see lots of people doing that as we go along. But hopefully we'll have about 20-25 minutes of Barry presenting through his slides, and then a Q&A session at the end. There are a lot of people, I'm sure you have lots of questions, and we're struggling a little bit with technology today, so I apologise for that. But hopefully we can get through there. So if everything is working okay, the best thing I can do is stop speaking now and hand you over to Barry. So hopefully that will work smoothly, and if it does, Barry will appear and I will disappear. Okay, thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry about slight technical issues. I don't think NHT should chastise themselves too much compared to the DFE last week, where there were 8,700 people on the line and NHS couldn't get the technology right, and I ended up dialing in on the landline. So at least I'm live online today. I want to start by giving a context for some of this work, because it was interesting hearing Andy remind us when I last spoke on this for NHT and how things have moved on. If we go to the next slide, that's it. I just want to remind you that this work was actually only published on the 25th of April. It's not even 3 months old yet. It won't be 3 months old till this coming weekend. And the impact it's had has been quite enormous. Those of you who know anything about my career know that I've not exactly been quiet during that career, and have published widely, as well as my time in headship in schools. And this really has had an incredible impact. And I therefore want to draw your attention to that website. When you're reflecting over the summer, when you're thinking, when you're wondering how it'll be receiving perhaps a new class of children back in September, and all their fears and worries that they normally bring to that, and how those will be compounded by the fact that maybe they've not met you, or met you only very briefly, they've not been to visit their new classroom, all sorts of dynamics for the children that could impact on their emotional well-being. So on that website, you will find what by next Friday will be 15 podcasts, all sorts of things. Those of you that perhaps are working closely with your governors, we've put up a podcast on compassionate governance, absolutely superbly prepared by Polly McMeekin, with great insights, because governors, I think, have found their role difficult to discharge during this time. You'll find latterly some very practical classroom-based stuff by Katie Fielding, by Lee Blakeman and Amy Hockey from Chad's Grove School. So there's something there for everyone, whether you're a school leader, whether you're a classroom teacher, whatever. A massive information. It links to the Facebook page, which now has 7,000 members on it. The original podcast that I prepared on the recovery curriculum has currently had over 250,000 hits on YouTube. Let me give you a bit more of a context, because it's that context that's changed. People are saying, well, do DFE approve of this? Well, let me firstly be clear, I do not want DFE's rubber stamp on this. It could be the kiss of death. But yes, DFE do support this. Last week, I was the keynote speaker twice for DFE in their online conferences. Those of you within the SEND community who've not seen the RSHE, the launch of the new RSHE curriculum, and how it was specially prepared for a webinar last week by DFE, that's on the DFE website now, and it's also on my website if you want to go there. On Thursday, my son and I, Matthew, who's my co-author in this, presented on the recovery curriculum in response to NHS's position statement on the mental health and emotional well-being of our children. We already know clearly there's been an 8.1% erosion in the mental health of our children during this pandemic, and I don't think that's a realistic figure yet. We may yet see more. I think another interesting commentary last week was from Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector at Ofsted, where she talked about all schools rebuilding during the autumn term. There will be no inspections. Ofsted will be around, Ofsted will come into schools to quality assure, but they will want to see your support plans, those rebuilding plans for rebuilding, recovery. And she clearly said decisions and curriculum next term need to be made on the needs of each child. Some children have lost a lot of time. So that's a clear call to personalizing the curriculum, to designing learning that touches that child at their point of learning need on re-entry. Not what any politically driven curriculum says, but your response as an empathetic, compassionate teacher to that child. Can we remind ourselves, colleagues, that teaching is a relationship-based profession? When those children return on day 1 in September, they will not want to read your fancy name label. They'll want to look into your eyes. And when they find the empathetic human being that learns there, then they will offer you themselves as learners. And oh boy, can you teach. Colleagues, you have treasure in your hands. Treasure that can transform lives. And more than ever, our children need your wisdom, your compassion, your tenderness, your kindness as their teachers. Next slide, please. So the recovery curriculum is based on 5 losses: loss of routine, structure, a loss of friendship and opportunity, and a loss of freedom. These were all emerging trends that when we first wrote the recovery curriculum, we were emerging in the press, in the literature, in the news. And I did a sort of head count of those that were mentioned most frequently, and these were they. And you can just imagine, I don't need to even articulate some of those, what that's meant. And that loss of friendship, I was with a group of children yesterday afternoon for something I'll mention later, and very much the loss of friendships has been profound. They have very clear views on home learning as well, which, whilst teachers have done an utterly magnificent job, the children will say was tough going. I think the lack of mathematical ability in the majority of parents has been quite stunning. And loss of opportunity. You know, our year 11s, our year 13s are very concerned at the moment, just how their exam results will be. I know we're going to put carefully moderated systems in place. They'll be quality assured, but there are rites of passage in sitting your GCSEs and A-levels, and some feel they've not gone through that. And that has profoundly affected the mental health of some young people. Parents I know who've been reporting that their sons and daughters have virtually locked themselves down, not just at home, but in their bedrooms. We need to be very gentle with those young people and assure them that these results are not tarnished. They are the best we can do, and they are still of great value, equal value to others that have sat GCSEs and A-levels in previous years. That loss of freedom for our children as the weeks have passed has been very constraining. And for some children, they'll have been 6 months out of school by the time that they return. We really are going to have to focus on the process of learning to learn again. Next slide, please. So that loss of routine is been profound for some of our children. Some may be easily alarmed. Interesting, talking to primary schools, they are seeing when the year 6s have returned, self-harm in some of the girls in year 6. That's normally a secondary phenomenon, not a primary one. And that's coming through. And I've put physically and digitally, because some children have gone online, and we've been asking for a lot of online learning, so we've had to present the technology to the children, but some have discovered some very dark places online. There is a dark web out there where there are videos of how to self-harm, and some children, young people, have been accessing those. Others have been posting negative statements about themselves, and people have affirmed those negative statements. Something like, I'm feeling fat because I'm overeating during pandemic, and yes, you are a fat, what's it, has come back. Well, that doesn't affirm the self-image, self-esteem, self-confidence of our children. Next slide, please. That loss of structure, just thinking of those children and young people with autism. There have been 2 responses. Some have just enjoyed not having to go into the busyness of the school and have really thrived in lockdown. Others have been deeply disturbed about that massive interruption, what they've seen as an abandonment. I know of parents who've been having to drive their autistic sons and daughters past their school to assure them that the school is still there. And the words there about panic attacks in New Zealand, and I was on the phone just this morning to the principal psychologist in Christchurch, who's very experienced in managing children post-trauma situations. And what they're seeing as the New Zealand schools have gone back, and remember they've been less affected than many, many countries, is that the children return joyful and jubilant. There's an exhilaration of being with their friends again. But as time moves on, there is an emerging panic. And that's been a fairly new phenomena in the New Zealand system. And I'd ask you, well, what if our children start to show panic? Where are they going? Where's the safe place? If a child feels that happening to them, where's the safe space in your school and who's running it? Because if you say to a child, no, you can't go out of the classroom, you need to go and sit down, the next thing will be spontaneous urination. So you've got the choice. Either you try and clean that up in front of the class, trying to keep 29 others occupied, or we have a system in place which has the capacity to deal with those loss of self-regulatory behaviors. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned that loss of friendship is really, really profound. Some children I was talking to yesterday where they're in a parallel bubble. One little girl said to me, the children that are in the other group, well, my best friends are in there. I know why we've had to do this, but will they still want to talk to me when we come back together as a class in September? There are huge amounts of worries happening in our children. We've got to give them space, and next term is our chance to offer them opportunities to express that, to get rid of this. Colleagues, we do not want our children scarred by this experience. And we've got to do something constructive. We are not going to be pressured to offer a very full curriculum as we might have done in normal times. Everyone accepts there needs to be space and time for children to express their responses, to work it through. Next slide, please. The A-level student said, and it echoes what I was saying to you earlier about loss of rite of passage. I was preparing to run a marathon, but now they tell me there is no race. How does that feel? When your life opportunities are in someone else's hands at this point in time. Next slide. And so, what about those students who are carers? A group of children we don't talk enough about, that when you went into lockdown, for them that meant going home to additional responsibilities for caring for a much loved parent in the home, maybe. School was their respite. And the thought of having to do academic learning as well as care for a parent is very demanding. And for some, they'll feel that they are way behind their peer groups. We need to tell children they are not way behind. I was really distressed this morning. A colleague rang me. They just had their report home on their son or daughter. I don't know how we're managing to do reports when we've not had children nearby for a while. But one comment was, there seems to be a loss of motivation in Johnny. Oh, please, we should not be saying things like that about children. Is it any surprise there's a loss of motivation? Our classrooms are designed for social reciprocity and social interaction. Those are cornerstones of the learning processes, and children have been robbed of those for the very, very best of reasons. We should not be forming judgments or making parents feel bad about what they have and have not done. This is a chance to grasp that partnership with parents we all espouse to and often fail in, and really move things on with parents as co-educators. Whose child is it anyway? We're paid to do a job. Next slide, please. So anxiety, trauma, bereavement are zooming around, powerful forces. Our children are inevitably vulnerable. Lockdown is not a natural state for the child, and their mental health will be fragile. Next slide. So there are 4 consequences to all those losses I've articulated, and you can subdivide those losses. You may want to add more. These are just suggestions, colleagues. They are not tablets of stone. They're to help focus your thinking when you've been very busy in preparing classrooms, in running online learning, in social distancing your classrooms and your schools. My task as someone in the position I'm in has been to do some of that thinking that can help us as a profession. I am a teacher too. And bereavement, attachment, anxiety, as the Archbishop of Canterbury said in one of his speeches recently, are all traumas. Next slide. And if we don't deal with some of those traumas, they will have negative effects on our children. And this one on attachment. Children are attached to you as their teachers. They trust you. They value you. I know they give you a hard time sometimes, but you are important in their lives. They know that some of you, particularly our secondary colleagues, hold a key to their future. And they'll have a real sense of fear and insecurity. We just need to be mindful of these things. Some children will mask and camouflage that beautifully. You won't know, but it's bubbling underneath. Let's deal with it. One of my worries deep down is about hope, that this pandemic will rob some of our children of hope. Colleagues, hope is the gift of childhood. Let's restore that. As Amanda Spielman said, let's go through that process of rebuilding our children as active, engaged learners. Next slide, please. Just to remind you here, what does secure attachment mean then? Well, those children that are securely attached are better problem solvers, more curious. They achieve more academically, just what lots of you want. But they're not going to be in that place in September. I'm giving a lecture tomorrow as a reflection on the recovery curriculum and its developments over the last 3 months. And I've titled that lecture, Frail, Fragile and Fragmented, because that's how some of our children will return to you. Frail in their self-image as a learner. The learning pathways will be frozen, will be fragile. The toxic effects of fear and anxiety will have frozen some of those previously active neural pathways for learning. We need to reignite that learning. And the learning they will have is fragmented. Children will not return to your classes on a level playing field, do they ever? But it will be more diverse than usual, which will demand more differentiation and more personalization. But actually, you're very skilled at that. And when children are securely attached in a social context, they're more cooperative, more empathetic, more self-aware. Next slide, please. The Royal College have now termed the concept, the phenomena of lockdown anxiety. And like a lot of things in this lockdown period, there is not a secure evidence base. I normally work very much to evidence-based practice. We've no experience of a pandemic. A lot of what I'm saying to you this morning is applying what I know from other contexts and other times of dealing with these issues as a professor, working now in mental health and education. And so when the psychiatrist articulated this, it's a phenomena. So how do we apply what we know about anxiety to lockdown anxiety? Next slide. So in this slide, based particularly on McCullough's work, but also that of Professor Demuta Frith and her work particularly with children with autism and children in hyper-anxious states. Anxiety is a key block to learning. So what's going on? Cortisol begins to rise in the brain. Now, we all need a bit of cortisol to kickstart us, to get us going during the day. But if those cortisol levels continue to rise, and they hit the surface of the brain, they will block the memory imprint. So you could have had a child sitting in your class who's seemingly looking down at the work you've asked them to do. They're not saying boo to a goose, but actually they're rigid with fear. They don't want you to ask a question, draw attention to them, so they keep their head down and have this appearance of being engaged in learning, but it's making no sense. The memory has not retained what it is you've said or asked them to do. And if I had done a lesson and went down the corridor with that child and said, oh, what was that lesson that the teacher just taught? It was really interesting, wasn't it? They'd say, I don't know. They're not being rude. They just did not remember. So as the next slide says to us, the anxious child is not a learning child. So how are you going to reinstate that child as a learner? Colleagues, learning is a dignifying process. Education is a dignifying process. You are educators, and the tool of your teaching trade is to engage children as learners. Next slide. So to summarize so far, let me be clear. The recovery curriculum is a concept. My son and I kicked around whether we should call it a concept, but we chose construct. It's part of that broader word, construction. And it's about you constructing learning that, as Spielman has said, goes with the individual needs of a child. And that's going to take compassion from you and understanding, compassionate leadership. What were the aims and values of your school prior to lockdown? Use those to inform the curriculum in this coming term, to re-empower, to restart your ethos. And a lot of the time, colleagues, it's going to have to be best informed judgment. Well, as a teaching profession, we're a profession really of good guesses at times, where we go and venture into areas we've not known before. Teaching is an organic and generative profession. It's not static. We work in a dynamic, interactive medium. So best informed judgments, that's as much as we can expect. But those personalized responses are going to be crucial and critical to some of those learners in front of you from September onwards. Next slide. So these are 5 levers. These are really pedagogical processes that my son Matthew, who's head teacher of a school, devised. Let's just go through what the levers actually mean, because they're getting referenced quite a lot. It makes me smile when I just see something written saying, well, building on the 5 levers of, it's like it's always been there. It's like saying working phonics is, so let's explore what they actually mean so you understand that. Relationships is so important. Relationships is going to be key to curriculum delivery next term. Isn't it always? But even more so, because children will come back very worried and very anxious. We can't expect them to return just joyfully. And what we've tried to design with the recovery curriculum is actually a joyful curriculum, one that will re-dignify those children and enable us to celebrate. Every child is a learner. Every child achieves, and it should be celebrated. So reach out and greet your children with a smile. Use the relationships you can establish with them to cushion any discomfort in learning. Remember what I said earlier about them looking into your eyes. It's your humanity they will want to meet first and foremost. Your empathy as a fellow human being, regardless of age, stage, position, or title. That's when they will reach out to you. And when I say community in Lever 2, it's about starting to feel again a belonging to your school community. What must it be like to be a Leicester child at the moment who was similarly sent into lockdown and then came back and began to refresh those bonds of trust with their teachers, and then was sent into lockdown again? For some children, they will have felt a double abandonment. They will be in mourning for the loss of their school, which actually they love and enjoy so much. And again, that friendship group, and again, that teacher that they trust. So let's rebuild our school communities, but also let's, in that process, value our parents and the magnificent job they've done, the best that they could do, educating their children. We just closed our schools one day and said, right, folks, over to you, and handed online learning and other forms of learning to our parents. We need to celebrate what they have done too. We need to listen to what's happened to the children in this time. If parents, when they first return their children, are overly anxious or a bit pushy, it's because we trusted them for 6 months of learning. They want to know that their child is doing okay, that they've done an all right job, not as good as you. I think the opinion of the teaching profession has risen hugely in the eyes of parents, but they have been our partners. Let's keep them as our partners. And as the next point about the levers, children will have learned differently in home. Maybe they've just been the only child at home learning. So it's vital that we make the skills for learning in a school environment explicit again to our children and young people, to reskill and rebuild their confidence as learners. And we can do that through a transparent curriculum. My son interviewed his student parliament a few weeks back and said, when you do return to school, what do you want from us as your teachers? And from year 7 to year 12, they all said, we want someone to explain what is this coronavirus. We want to scientifically know what it's about. Why has it caused this pandemic? I don't think that's an unreasonable request from any child. In fact, they deserve an explanation from us as informed teachers. Is your lesson ready to deliver on that topic? That's something for everyone. So you open up that conversation, that recovery conversation. And space. They need space outside to go and be physically. They've been locked down. There will be a lot of excess energy flying around. They will not know how to self-regulate some of their jubilant feelings. Their moods will swing. They'll be as high as kites 1 minute and really down in the dumps the next. They need time in the school context to rediscover their self-image, their self-esteem, their self-confidence. We must make sure that no child is disadvantaged against their peers. I met children yesterday who, because others had been in school, they were key worker children, they think those children have gone through the regular curriculum and we're miles ahead of them. And you need to reassure them that's not so. And again, not to be critical that a child hasn't grasped a key concept, maybe because it wasn't discussed well at home. It's about just calmly going there and teaching again. And next term is our time and space to do this. There needs to be space in the school too, as I've said earlier, for those children who need some emotional support, and who's delivering that. Next slide. So our suggestion is 3 phases of recovery, something for everyone. Those conversations I've just mentioned about what's the pandemic, what's coronavirus, talking about how we felt. I think it's okay for us to be open about, we've been anxious. When you shop, aren't you hypervigilant? And we're about to go into shopping experiences where we'll all be masked. When I wear my mask, I keep smiling at people and you think, I think you fool, Barry. Nobody can see you smiling. we need something for everyone. And then there will be small group work with some children to meet their more personalized needs. And then there will be those children who will need what we call deep recovery, a longer period of time, for whom this has been profoundly traumatic. What have Bernardo said recently? There's been a 44% rise in children going into care during this period, at a time when, in a commensurate way, there's been a decrease in the number of children, number of adults coming forward as foster carers. Only today, Save the Children have predicted there will be 10 million children worldwide who will never return to school. There are worries about some of our teenagers who were perhaps excluded or were in alternative provision, who may never return again in the system. There will be consequences. And all we can do is try to provide some systems and structures in school that will ameliorate some of this loss and facilitate some of this process of recovery, of rebuilding. Next slide. Some of our children will return very disengaged, disenfranchised, would not want to be an active learner again. They've been switched off. Some of you know that my earlier work has been around engagement, particularly based on my time as National Director for the DFE on the Complex Needs Project, and the pedagogy we evolved there was built on engagement, which is the research tells us, the single best predictor for successful learning. And as the end of this quote says, engagement is the liberation of intrinsic motivation. So please have a look at the Engagement for Learning website. Those of you that are in SEND or working with children with EHCPs know that the Rochford Review and its recommendations on assessment has recommended that the engagement model will become statutory summative assessment, and that will be from September 2021. So this is probably a good time to have a go at using the engagement profile, of profiling some of your children as they return, finding out how they're curious, how they are persistent. Those 5 areas will be 5 lenses through which you can look at your child as a learner and profile them. Those resources have been recently updated with my colleague Beth Cobil, and they're all free and downloadable online. Next slide. This is a free book on beating the virus. It's from Books Beyond Words. It's wordless. It is deliberately wordless. There's a whole literature around the value of wordless books. You see, if you want an emotional release from the child about their experience in lockdown, that comes from the part of the brain that we call the amygdala. It's at the back of the brain. When the emotion is released, the emotion transverses the brain. If you put in words, so if you took the picture in the top right-hand corner and put, let's give the woman a name, Yvonne is making a telephone call to 111. When the child has to read those words, it's the frontal cortex that kicks in to decode graphically or phonetically the words that are there. That will then block the emotional release that's coming through from the amygdala. What do we want? Literacy or emotional release? There's a time and a place for both. And these books are about facilitating that emotional expression. Do get it, please. It's free. You don't know the conversations you're going to need to have. Next slide, please. They've actually produced some more free resources from Books Beyond Words. Look at that one in the middle. When someone dies from coronavirus. Bleak title, isn't it? But we can't have had, colleagues, 44,000 people die in our country without it being someone's grandparent, some child's aunt or uncle, some child's next door neighbour, or that nice lady over the street who is a nurse in the NHS. And that's where that deep recovery stuff comes in. There are more titles even than the ones I'm showing you there. So again, free, downloadable. Why wouldn't you have them there? Printed off. Just have them around. Let children explore, have those conversations that are so necessary. And on the next slide, it's actually available on an app as well, if that's a medium you prefer to work in. You can also get other stories that are available to go on whiteboards, a fantastic medium. We need stimuli for these meaningful conversations. And I'd like to announce today that I've been commissioned by Baroness Hollins, the editor-in-chief of Books Beyond Words, to write 2 children's stories during lockdown. And I've, amongst everything else, I finished those. They're with the illustrator, Charlotte Furman, from the Furman family. Peter Furman was the guy who invented the clangers, bagpuss, etc. The first illustrations of the books were back, and I went to our local primary school yesterday and checked them out with Year 1 and Year 6 there. They're being piloted in a school in Dover as well. They will be ready for mid-August. I've fundraised the £12,000 production costs of these because I want them to be free and downloadable to every child or student in the country who can make use of them. There will be Lucy and Lenny in lockdown and Lucy and Lenny return to school. They will be wordless books. They're about what was your experience in lockdown? How do you feel about returning to school? Do you feel worried and anxious like Lenny or happy like Lucy? And all sorts of opportunities there. You can look out for them on my website. We'll be advertising them soon. And as I say, they'll be free and downloadable. And they'll also be on that recovery curriculum website I gave you at the beginning. Next slide, please. So I want to give you now some other useful resources. Nurture UK have halved the price of their bereavement box. It's 60 fantastic cards, beautifully laminated. We like laminated, don't we? For all sorts of bodily functions I prefer not to talk about on air. But now we've got the virus as well. So you can have your wipeable cloths and the children can wipe them after use, or you can wipe them. They're a fantastic resource. And in the next slide, it actually shows you there, this is the transition toolbox, same model as the bereavement box. And you can see there's some samples of the cards. Very quick and easy to use. I pick them up and I look and I think, yep, I can teach that. This is an absolute must for year 6. Again, in the primary school I went into yesterday, they were using this with year 6s. And in fact, the schools they were going into had got it for year 7, so that the transition process, which let's face it, has not been what we would have wanted for our year 6s this year, that can be continued when the children enter into Y7. I had a secondary head ask me the other day, how did I think year 7 should be modelled? And okay, if I'm allowed an opinion asked of you, my view is that year 7, that first term should be static in one classroom with teachers coming to them. Children will not be ready to cope with the overwhelming experience. And we've got lots of research already on how transition fails some children and how that's a starting point for them for disengaging from school. We need to be very careful with this year 6 cohort about to go on transition. Again, the price of this by Nurture UK, which is a charity, has been reduced. Next slide. This is 60 sensory minutes. For those of you working with students with special needs and with autism, this is fabulous. I've just finished a 2-year research project using this as a stimulus for children with special needs and attachment issues, because we don't have a clear pedagogy on attachment. And I've just had an article accepted for publication with the 2 teachers I worked with, which will articulate how this sort of work on sensory work, and particularly where we blend in the process of imitation. Remember what Piaget said, imitation is the foundation of all learning. This is a very useful box. Again, Nurture UK. Next slide. And this is written by Tina Ray and colleagues. And for those of you who have trained as mental health leads, this is a perfect book for you. I don't think any mental health lead, or those of you who have been on mental health first aid training, ever thought you'd have to apply your skills to a pandemic, but now is the time for you to step up. I know schools that are releasing their mental health leads to be doing interventions around schools from September and backfilling their teaching timetable to enable that to happen in schools. And can I announce that tomorrow, Tina Ray will launch on the Evidence for Learning conference that's happening online tomorrow. She will launch the well-being, the well-being box that is designed around the recovery curriculum. So she's designed a set of resources that pick up on the key features of recovery curriculum, and that's being launched tomorrow and will be published by Hinton House, the same publishers that are on here, so you can track that on their website. Next slide, please. And these resources I would highly recommend. This is for you as teachers to audit mental health in your school, but on the next slide, and I was on the phone to the publisher for these this morning, and he assured me he's still got a fair amount of stock that he can get out to people. He's reduced the price. He's taken off postage and packing. If you use, there is a code, which is MHPost. I'll say again, MHPost, or quite simply say you've heard one of my lectures. He'll give you 10% off. But why wouldn't you tell parents about these? These will each cost £4.10. And my primary school locally yesterday had sent a newsletter out for this week and had said to parents, this is where you can get them. Our budget won't extend to buying them. But if you want something for your children over the summer, we recommend these. Because we've sent home lots of literacy and numeracy and other subjects. What if we sent home for online learning or other forms of learning that was about the emotional well-being of children? These can be personalized emotional well-being journals. There's a child I've been supporting, and I've been using the Key Stage 2 journal because his mom went as matron to the Nightingale Hospital in London. And he often now goes into a catatonic state with the fear and trauma that that's brought upon him. And this journal is helping him work through and express some of those very deep and profound feelings that have been a consequence for him of this pandemic and his mother's call to duty. Please have a look at these. They are well worth it. Next slide. Colleagues, to round up, if I analysed all the mental health literature for you, it boils down to two things: what makes us happy and what makes us sad. And what we often do is we use what makes us happy to regulate when we're sad. We go home for a tough day in school. It's not acceptable to kick the dog. It's better to put the lead on the dog, walk the dog, and walk yourself. The endorphin release will help self-regulate your feelings at the end of that tough day. So in the next slide, look, a simple suggestion here is a happiness box. I have written a rationale for making a happiness box based on the research, and my colleague Bev Coble has done a step-by-step guide on how to make a happiness box. And for the really observant amongst you, yes, you've guessed it, this is a glorified shoebox that you decorate, or the child decorates. Well, that's the first art lesson planned, isn't it? And then they get to put in it the things that make them happy. And so I don't think some of our children will cope with the length of some of our lessons. Their concentration will be all over the place. So if we do 15 minutes of maths and then say, right, we're going to have a 5-minute break, use your happiness box. And then we do another 15 minutes and we do an imitation activity like Simon says. And then we do another 15 minutes and we might do a mindfulness activity taken from 60 Mindful Minutes, which is again a NAHT UK box. This is no cost, low cost. Very interesting what children are choosing to put in their happiness box as well. It's almost for you a rough observational assessment of the state of their emotional well-being. Next slide. And for those of you that thought that looked very primary, here's a secondary version. This happiness box is to get a disengaged student back into school. It's all based around Demi Lovato. I know nothing about Demi Lovato, but these are all activities linked to Demi Lovato, and it's aided that student in re-entry to school. Again, free, downloadable, link on the previous slide, website there. It's there for you to use. Next paragraph, next slide, sorry. So relationships are key. We will have children damaged by loss and trauma during this time, some worried about their lifelong opportunities. Now is the time to restore what I would prefer to call their mental wealth, because when we talk mental health, we really mean mental ill health. We need to reassure our children that their aspirations for their future can become one day a reality. We all had dreams and aspirations. It's okay to dream. Some of our dreams came true, some did not. But it's part of our childhood, it's part of growing up. We do not want our children robbed of that aspect of their childhood. Next slide. Andy Hargreaves said this about an epidemic of mental health in 2016. I'd say now, at this point in history, in this pandemic, we need creativity, care and compassion on a scale that we've never ever witnessed before. And we need it from you, our teachers. Next slide. Kindness is absolutely key. The Mental Health Foundation did a wonderful piece on kindness on their website for Mental Health Awareness Week a month or so ago. And I've made a particular podcast just on mental health. It's on the Recovery Curriculum website. Do have a listen to it over the summer to deepen your understanding of where our children might be frail, fragile, and fragmented in their mental health when they return to your classrooms. Kindness is key. And in the next slide, as the Maori say, if kindness is shown, then kindness is what you shall receive. Colleagues, you've worked so hard these last few months. You've done utterly amazing things. You've been there for our children. You've been there for their families in all sorts of ways. Some of you have delivered food to families that you knew were impoverished. Some of you have delivered laptops. Some of you have supported, as my son did, children outside McDonald's who didn't have Wi-Fi in their own home but were desperate to do their work on the laptop they'd been given. You've shown kindness. Let's continue to show kindness in the relationship-based profession that we are. I wish you well in your endeavours, and on the last slide, these are the websites to check out to guide you in the months ahead. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here today at the end of what has been a really challenging term. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely wonderful, and lots of really positive comments in the chat as you've been going through. I'll let you go on a little bit longer because I thought that was a really rich vein of stuff you were mining there. So I hope that hasn't eaten too much into the rest of people's days. I've got some fantastic questions coming up. I'm sure there will be more questions as we go along. Sorry, my phone is ringing, which doesn't help. Yeah, no, you can hear me, can you? I'm not muted. My first question is really what kind of level of engagement you're getting from Ofqual, because you mentioned Amanda earlier and her interest in it. Sorry, Ofsted rather than Ofqual. Are Ofsted buying into the concept of recovery curriculum? Are you getting purchase with them there?
I think the very fact that the Chief Inspector talks about rebuilding, it's in the domain of recovery. Again, I think we've got an emphatic message. No inspections. What more do we need? There's Amanda hasn't rung me personally, no, but I think I'm quite happy with what she said, and I've had that conversation back with DFE based on what Amanda said, and they said absolutely. And tonight I'm speaking to about 3,000 people in the College of Teaching, and the College of Teaching are backing the recovery curriculum. Wonderful,
wonderful. Good to hear that. And I'm glad Amanda's leading us into a place of pragmatism, if nothing else. So that's good. There's a lot of concern about resources, as always is, and there is supposed to be additional money coming around the corner. And there's one, I don't know if it's a question or a point really, but a question that the money should be able to be spent on mental health. And I don't know whether that's going to happen or quite what we can do to make sure it is, but rather just on playing catch up, whether we can actually channel resources into mental health. Do you have a view on that?
Oh yeah, let's catch up, but let's catch up with each other first of all, shall we? Let's catch up and re-establish those relationships, because no amount of money will heal what some of our children have experienced unless the relationship is in place. So I think some of that money needs to be spent on mental health and emotional well-being, because if the child is too anxious, they're not going to be a learner, as I said earlier. So in fact, I think very much, and the government is committed to mental health. We've already got the mental health first aid leads and so on in schools. So we need to work through that. Last week, the DFE launched the RSHE curriculum, Relationship, Sex and Health Education curriculum. I was invited to launch that in the spirit of the recovery curriculum. Colleagues, if we're going to embed this beyond the autumn term, then embed it in RSHE. And I said, by chance, I was allowed to use my own script, no DFE written script. And I said the RSHE curriculum should be at the heart of the curriculum, not the core, but at the heart of the curriculum, alongside literacy and numeracy. And the DFE officials at the other end applauded at that point.
Good. Well, you always do well if you manage to get DFE officials applauding, in my humble experience. Yes. Speaking as a former one myself. One other question on statutory assessment. Given all that's going on in terms of these young people's lives and getting them back into the world of school and the world of normality, really. Do you think statutory assessment should be put on hold? Is there something we should do to help encourage that to happen, do you think?
I don't feel qualified to answer that, Andy. I'm not a secondary specialist and I wouldn't want to answer that. All I'm concerned about is that we have children prepared to engage in statutory assessment, and we need to recognise that our starting point from doing that at the beginning of the next academic year for any student, a young person or child, is not the strong starting point that we might normally have gone through.
Yeah.
And we need to recognise that fragility in how we manage and support our children and young people. We know that exam pressure can often bring about some very tragic consequences in some of our young people due to that pressure, they're going to be even more vulnerable. So I'm more concerned about how we prepare them for that system next year. Great,
thanks. Yeah, I've got one last question I'll put to you, and then I'll need to wrap up because we're really very much running out of time. A question on everyone's mind, I'm sure, is do you have any advice for supporting the mental health of staff who themselves are coming back to work and are anxious and are shielding and concerned?
I'd suggest, Andy, that every member of staff that's listened to this goes away and makes their own happiness box for the summer and indulge yourself. I'd normally say that wine shouldn't be part of that, but I'll relax it today. And just treasure yourself this summer for the person that you have been and for the person those children need you to be. And I've said person, I've said teacher. The teaching skills will follow once the relationship is established. Once there's that shared humanity, then it will all flow. That's what the children are looking for. They'll come back frightened and fearful.
Yes.
You can heal that very quickly. I've every confidence in our profession.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'll be off to put my own happiness box together. May or may not include a few clangers as a child of the 70s. Certainly begged for some, perhaps, Mr. Ben, while we're there. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Barry. It's been absolutely wonderful. Some really great comments coming through from people. Thank you for your time. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over time. You'll see in front of you now there's a poll. If you'd be so kind as to fill in the poll before you log off, that would really be helpful to us in terms of knowing what you thought and what we can do more of for you in the future. As I said at the start, we have recorded the presentation. We'll be sending that round to you along with Barry's wonderful slides. So all the links you've seen there, all the links to resources you'll have at your fingertips. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask us here at the NAHT, drop us an email at events@naht.org.uk. Have a look at our stuff on Wellness and Protect, which is a really helpful resource out there available to staff. There's lots of free wellbeing services available to NAHT members and non-members until the end of August. If you're an NAHT member, thank you. If you're not and you'd like to become one, get in touch. There are offers, if you look at the NAHT website at the moment, incentivising memberships. So please consider that, because obviously we're better working together. If you're interested in NAHT putting some tailored training together, again, if you drop us a line at the events@naht.org.uk, we'd be more than happy to put together some quality assured training for you to help you on the way. That's probably all I've got to say. I should give a little shout out to Back to Schools with Scarf. I promised to mention them through the Quorum Life Education. That's another free resource that's out there. So there's loads of stuff. There's loads of information. There's loads of advice and help for people to access. I haven't got time for any more questions really because we're way over. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Barry for his excellent presentation as ever. And I can see them clicking up. I'm sure you can as well, Barry. Everyone's saying thank you. That's
thank
wonderful. That's it for this school term here at NAHT. That's the last of our webinars. However, next week on the 21st of July, there is a pathway session with Andrew Hammond talking to Max Coates about team games. So if you'd like to log in and have a look at that, I'm sure that'll be entertaining, informative and witty. That's between 5 and 5:45 on the 21st of July. But I think that's all we've got time to say today. If you've got questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, we'll pick them up and email people separately. I'd just like to say thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a good summer.
So we're all out of time. Okay, thank you. Goodbye now.